Hi, this is Mac Antigua, Director of Alumni Engagement here at the National Office of Public Allies. And if you're watching us live, awesome, or if you're watching us in the future, awesome. You're tuning into the second installment of the Public Allies Alum Dilemma Circle. We're still looking for a good name for it, but the gist of it is we're connecting our alumni who are interested in education reform, and we're working on this, and we want to create a forum over Google for leaders to support other leaders. So this is what it is. And so we're really excited to have, we did our first installment, our pilot episode last month, and now we're adding a new installment. We're bringing second round 2. And so I'm excited to have our alums back. And so if you like what it is, join us on our next one. We're going to do one a month. And I'm excited to have our host. Before I introduce the host, let me introduce, let me whip around and go through the other folks who are present, all the other alums on the call. So let's go. Let's start with my colleague from Brooklyn, New York. Can you introduce yourself?
Hi, my name is Oscar. I'm calling from Brooklyn, New York. Excited to join the call. Public Allies, Connecticut alum, 2012. Currently working for a nonprofit organization doing some project management in STEM education, and excited to be here.
Awesome. Thanks so much for joining us, Oscar. Let's go to Philadelphia.
Hey, what's up, everybody? This is Mike Dunn, calling in from Philly, as Mac mentioned. I currently work in a high school as post-secondary counselor and history teacher at a school called AIM Academy. I'm a PA alum 0809 from Eagle Rock.
Awesome. Welcome back. Great to have you on call, Michael. We've got our dilemma host. If you are the guy who's bringing the dilemma, introduce yourself and where you're calling in from.
Sure. My name is Adam Koehler, calling in from St. Paul, Minnesota. I'm a PA alum from Milwaukee 2010-2011. I am a current teacher candidate and a special ed paraprofessional right now in Minnesota.
Great. Thanks for joining us again, Adam, as well as bringing the dilemma that we'll be chewing over, a little bit of a dinner for 5, if you will, or midway dinner, afternoon snack for 5. And with that, I'm excited to introduce our host, Public Allies alum from '94 in Milwaukee, founder of Eagle Rock site, currently works at the Eagle Rock School of Professional Development Center as the associate director there, and he's the one who will be taking us through the protocol today. Ladies and gentlemen, a man who needs no introduction in the Western civilized world, Dan Condon.
Oh, I hope everyone's ready to.
By the way, it's a men's episode again. It's men. All these dudes talking about
Really?
Let's just name it. The awkward thing in the room. We're gonna do a better job of recruiting.
Oh, it's awesome. My guess is that alumni in the education space overwhelmingly are women, so it's great to see guys on the call, and we'd love other genders represented. So thanks so much for being here. Good to see you, Mr. Dunn. I just spoke with Adam yesterday, but good to see you again as well, my man. So for those who are viewing in, there may be people joining who aren't on the call. Is that right, Mac? Possibly?
Possibly.
Yeah, the thousands of viewers. So kind of, you know, Mac and I had talked, Adam was on the first call, and we were just looking for a space to convene alum in the education space and have it be actionable. So these are kind of convenings through Hangout where we hope to help folks make some forward movement on a dilemma that they bring. And so Oscar and Mike, what you probably didn't know coming into this call is hopefully we're going to tap one of you to bring the dilemma for the next call. Okay. So what I'm going to do, if you don't want to follow along in the group chat section, I did post the protocol we'll be using, which is a consultancy protocol. I'll also be cutting and pasting what it is we're doing in each section. But kind of the brilliant piece of using school reform initiative protocols, which are one of the primary tools, in addition to new monitor group convening tools that I learned from Mac last week, are that it's not an expert model. So we just ask a whole lot of thoughtful, probing questions that are going to help Adam move along on the dilemma that he has brought. So we're still going to try to wrap this up by 2:30. I know you all have, well, 2:30 Mountain. I don't know what time it is where you are. But Adam and I spoke, we've emailed and we spoke yesterday about his stellar dilemma. And a great dilemma, in my eyes, is something that keeps you up at night that you don't have an easy solution to. So Adam has spent countless nights awake trying to crack the nut on this dilemma that he's about to speak to. And so we're going to kick it over to Adam, who's going to give us an overview of the dilemma. And then toward the end of the dilemma, he's going to pose a thoughtful question that we're going to consider. And then I'll take us through some of the next segments of the protocol, which include some clarifying questions, probing questions, and such. But we're going to turn it over to Adam, who's going to share for a few minutes the context of his dilemma, along with an overarching question for us.
Sure.
Adam, you're on.
So my dilemma comes out of a couple of experiences I've had with youth serving organizations and working with adult volunteers in those youth serving organizations. And it stemmed out of one particular experience I had this summer where we were leading a group of underserved youth from St. Paul to the Boundary Waters of Minnesota on a camping trip with the purpose of sort of youth development. And they intentionally involved adult volunteers, adult mentors, and they were volunteers who had never met the youth before. So they want to be involved, and they're part of the program, but there's also a new layer of stress when you're adding volunteers who are not youth development workers, who just to like try and make sure everyone's on the same page. So my dilemma comes to from that experience, but also relates to like working in schools or other youth serving organizations about how do you work with adult volunteers in a way that supports the program and doesn't detract from it in that you're doing more managing of the adult situation than you are of the youth.
All right, I'm going to ask you to repeat that overarching question again, and I'm going to put that up in the group chat.
So, put more simply, how can I involve adult volunteers in a way that supports the program and does not add added stress? Can you repeat anything?
No, so how can I involve adult volunteers for value add to the program without adding additional stress?
Yeah.
Does that sound good?
Yeah.
We'll check in on that question again toward the end of some probing questions. But at this point, what clarifying questions do folks have for Adam? So these questions would have a brief factual answer. And neither at this point or really anywhere in the protocol are we going to jump to solutions for Adam. But what?
And if you do, Dan will hit you with these.
I will.
Pushing you towards.
I will.
Clarify.
Like a buzzer
I will
button.
do that.
Not right.
So
Adam, I have a question.
Yeah.
I have a question. Clarifying
Sure,
question,
man.
Adam. Can you tell me, in this case, how many adult volunteers are you leveraging? As well as, can you clarify the current level of preparation you currently do with them?
So for that particular trip, it was the adult mentor who was like he was a school teacher with the youth, and then there were two volunteers who just wanted to be a part of the program, who had maybe done some like outdoor or youth work before, but were not they were not getting paid. They were just volunteering with the program. So it's 3 total volunteers.
Okay.
And Adam, can you give us a ratio of adults to students in this case?
Yeah, there was 5 youth and then 3 adults, and then myself as the staff member.
As a follow-up to that, Can you just define what you mean by the word stress a little bit more?
Let me see. Like having to manage adult team, the amount of like mental effort that it goes to, as well as like just having another something to deal with besides just being able to focus all my attention on the youth and where they're at and the development that they're going on. Did that answer your question?
Yes, I think so.
Okay.
Adam, this is Mac.
Yeah.
Oscar, if you got questions, you got to get in quick. I just want to clarify, the 3 volunteers you brought on are brand new to this particular delivery or frame of working with these students, or just one, or was it just the 2 volunteers?
So the teacher obviously had worked with the youth before, but had never been a part of this program. And then the 2 volunteers, one of them had gone on a trip last year, and the other one, it was his first year.
Okay, so just to clarify, there's not only a familiarity of working with youth, but there's also the way, or at least the particular context that these youth are working within the adventure education or the experiential education framework you're in. So there's a couple, I'm hearing there's a couple of dimensions at play.
Yes, yeah.
Okay.
And that kind of goes back to the stress thing about managing philosophies of like, oh, this is how we do it over here, this is how we do it over here, this is how I did it in the past.
Got it.
Do you have an idea for how many, well, help me understand the activities you're talking about, like how many during the school year?
How many?
I mean, I'm thinking about the adventure activity you're talking about.
Yeah.
Is that primarily where you're trying to have touch points with volunteers, or are there additional opportunities you're looking to involve them in?
I think as a future teacher, it's also going to be parents and family members. So I see it happening in other places. But
got it.
Yeah.
And Adam, what is the nature of, or like, what are some of the goals of the activity that you're attempting to lead students through? Like, what are your desirable outcomes for students with these experiences?
I'm going to forget the specifics of the mission statement, but it's building critical life skills in underserved youth. I think I forget the more specifics, but it's basically building life skills of how to transfer these things that you do in the outdoors back to your home life. So, go ahead.
Can you give us a real quick snapshot of a typical student that you might be working with in this capacity?
Sure. The program itself draws from students, or it could be youth that are just with another nonprofit youth-serving organization. And then our program draws from those other, they already have a relationship with the youth in some way, and then they take them on this trip, and then they will have a relationship when they come back too. So the trip that I worked with was students from a middle school in St. Paul, downtown St. Paul. But there are other groups that will take youth from foster homes, youth from YMCA group, youth from all those sort of youth-serving organizations that exist in the city.
All right, the clock is ticking on this section.
I have one. Can I ask one question?
Absolutely.
Okay. So you mentioned that the one other volunteer had been on the group, had been on the trip, had been part of it last year, and then the other one, this is their first time. Can you tell me a little bit more about how you source the volunteers, where they come from? Is it mostly word of mouth, or is there another way or mechanism that folks can get engaged as volunteers?
I didn't get to run that part of the organization, but from what I heard from the volunteers, a lot of them looked up an ad on REI and then got involved.
Awesome.
Yeah, but I don't know what the like selection process was like.
Okay.
Sure.
Right.
So Adam, just want to clarify. So what I understand is that you not only, I'm hearing that your role is to bring these people along to execute this delivery. However, you are not privy to how they're selected, nor how they are marketed towards or prepared. Did I hear that correctly? Or
That's correct, yeah. So my role is to keep everyone safe and then to have the programming. But I didn't.
Right, but you didn't select who gets to come, nor did you perhaps have any say in how to identify or source these folks.
I did not have any say in it.
All right, we're gonna move on. We're gonna move along, and if you've got other clarifying questions, I bet you can find a way to get them in during the probing question section. So this for folks not intimately familiar with the consultancy protocol, this part, I'm going to talk a little bit about what probing questions are. So, and I'm about to post what I'm reading in the group chat section. These questions should be worded so they help Adam clarify or expand his thinking about the dilemma. They should not be questions couched in a suggestion, such as, I have a question for you. Have you ever thought about whatever? So kind of the bonus points for this section is if we can elicit a response from Adam where he would say something like, wow, I never thought about it that way. You just made my head explode. So Adam, you can also feel free to respond to any of these or just take them in. And then at the end of this section, we'll make sure that we're on track with the right question. If we want to amend the question, we can do that as well. Any questions about probing questions? I know that got real meta. That got really real meta. All right, well let's crack into it. And just so folks are aware, what's going to happen after this section is Adam's going to metaphorically leave the Google Hangout, and he's going to benefit from the conversation that we have with each other while he takes detailed notes or something like that. Although he will have it on video. So, who wants to kick us off with the probing question?
I have one.
What you got, Oscar?
What's your relationship like with that end of the organization that you ran the trip with? Is do you have a strong, as Mac pointed out, you don't have necessarily or you're not influenced, or your bucket of work does not necessarily talk to that bucket of work around recruiting the volunteers or preparing the volunteers. So my question is, what is your relationship like between you and the person who owns that bucket of work? And do you think that there is opportunity for conversation around bringing these buckets together? That might be suggestive, but the first part of the question is, what's your relationship like with that person?
So there's one staff member in Minnesota who I'm actually good friends with, like a past coworker, and she brought me into the organization. But the rest of the organization is in Colorado, and I don't have any relation with them. So I don't know.
What about the volunteers? When do you connect with the volunteers? Do you not meet them until they show up for the trip?
You do a phone call prep thing. So you go through this list of questions, and they call it like a team building phone call, but it was pretty basic. It
sounds more transactional than actual building.
Yeah.
Kind of building off that, Adam, what does your, if there is one, I don't know if there is or not, is there, I guess, a training program per se for volunteers, and what might that look like if there is one?
There was a single-day training for adult volunteers who came, and they would talk a lot about what the adult team should look like, and and I was there for the training too, and it just it was hard to dive deep into like the actual relationships with the people that you're working with. There was a lot of talking about things that could happen on a trip.
Adam, this is Mac. How many trips have you done already?
I just did one this summer, but I might be
Okay.
working with them again next summer.
Okay. And I guess my question speaks to what is the possibility of building relationships or camaraderie with returning volunteers? Is that something you're seeing as that's plausible in this framework, or do you see that the nature of this framework lends itself to always having a new team that's going to be taking people in due to the nature of how volunteers are sourced? I'm sort of curious about how
I think there's a good possibility of having people on the same trip, like adult teams in the same trip, but I don't know how certain that is. Being my first year on the program, I don't know. But it sounded like volunteers, when they they continue to come back and they like the program. So there's a possibility of returning with the same people.
So to follow up with that, Adam, is there any mechanism in place within the organization for tracking volunteer relationships with students, or for figuring out who's interacted with who in the past, and to try to see, what kind of relationships are already existing amongst all the stakeholders?
What I got to see was that there's feedback forms at the end of the trip for the volunteer to staff and staff to volunteer, but I don't know about past. I don't know if I had access to past feedback things with volunteers.
I have another question, but this is sort of about common philosophy. Is there a kind of underlying like adventure education philosophy or experiential philosophy that the organization is aligned behind, and kind of how do folks communicate that to everybody involved?
There is, but it wasn't. I don't think it was clearly defined for each person. There's definitely like the philosophy of the youth are doing the work, so you're not going out there and providing like a vacation. It's work, and it's a lot of, it's like the students are going to learn through doing something. So if you are doing something for them, they're not going to be able to learn from it. But I guess that was more of my preconceived notion because I've done other programs. I don't know that there was like one single thing. There was things talked about in the training, kind of like I said, like overview of like things that would be helpful, but there was not like a list of like philosophies for adults. There was for the youth and like what we want the youth to get out of it, like a mission statement, but not like what we want the adults to do in relation to, like you said, the adventure education stuff.
Adam, I hear there are feedback forms. I want to get a little bit more clarity, or maybe probe a bit more. Is there some sort of evaluation that is offered for volunteers or you, so that someone has a sense of how people performed in that role?
Yeah, all the adult volunteers provide feedback forms for the staff members.
Okay.
Yep.
And is it vice versa? Are you allowed to also evaluate the volunteers as well?
Yes, I had to fill out volunteer evaluation forms as well.
Okay. Do the students provide feedback?
What was that?
Do students provide feedback as well?
They do of the program. I don't remember if there was any of the mentors though. It was youth to program, not youth to mentors or youth to staff.
Okay.
I'm wondering a little bit about how students, how the volunteers themselves, and how you or other staff would articulate their role or expectations. Do you think folks would give the same answer about this is what they're here to do and these are the expectations? Or is there a mismatch? Can you?
From the group that I worked with, they were, that was the most unclear point of, like, especially the volunteer who was brand new and the teacher who was his first time with the program. Like, they were very unclear of, like, their role and how much they should participate in, like, pushing the youth to do, like, to think critically about what they're doing, or just, like, how to run program stuff in outdoors. The adult volunteer who had been there before knew the logistics, but in my eyes, he didn't know the program as well. But that's also because I just had my own mental idea of what I wanted the program to look like, so I didn't have it all, like, written down. So we had a little bit of miscommunication in that way.
And what do you think students, if you were to ask students to explain, you know, why this person's here at this activity, what might they say?
I don't know. Yeah, I really don't know what they would have said. We never really talked about it, and I never really got their point of view on it.
And then maybe one other lens, like if you think about school leadership, I wonder what they'd say about the intention of adult volunteers.
That I also, yep, that's the question where I don't have an answer to. It's making me think in a new way. I never really thought about how they would understand it. Because I see the benefit of volunteers, but usually from an outside perspective, not from a student perspective.
For sure. Awesome. Let's do maybe 7 more minutes if we've got them of probing questions.
So one of my questions builds on what Dan was just asking about how students view maybe their volunteers, but also I wonder what do you think students might say about their purpose for being involved in the program at all? Right? What might they articulate as the reason why they're in, quote unquote, the woods, right?
Mm-hmm. I think that it differs from the beginning of the program to the end of the program. For some of the students, they understood that it was about, like, life skills growth. The other ones were kind of like, I just get a free trip to the boundary water. I get to get a free trip to go fishing. But at the end of it, all of them had an understanding of, like, I grew. They were saying things like, I grew in this way, or I got better at this. I'm going to do this in the future. So they got an understanding that it was for the purpose of bringing it back home and not just a vacation. I think that was pretty clear with the youth at the end.
I guess I also wonder a little bit about, I'm thinking about the stress piece and, like, ROI, right? So it's like, what's the threshold? Like, what would make it worthwhile or not worthwhile to say this was a successful, this adult's participation was a successful or unsuccessful volunteer activity, right? So so I've got that as a question, and it just makes me think about, well, if they were like a rock star youth worker and they were on the same page with your pedagogy and what the goals for the whatever the activity was,
mm-hmm.
That certainly was, that was surely ROI and less stressful for you. If there are other intentions for why you have volunteers, like, oh, we've got the CEO of REI that's going to be out on this bad boy, and he sucked, but you're going to get $50,000 of in-kind
Right.
product. You know, so like it makes me wonder about like what's the threshold and what are the lead and lag measures for what a successful volunteer would be.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree with you, Dan. And like the sort of the tipping point, right? The Gladwell-esque tipping point of the volunteer, right? At which point does the amount of stress the volunteer brings is too much.
Another question that I had was around, and you, as you mentioned, Rockstar student participants, Dan. I wonder, has the program been running long enough where you have the opportunity to bring them in as adult volunteers or have them play a diversity of roles other than just be participating? Like, is that an opportunity?
I think it is an opportunity, yeah. There wasn't any on my trip, but we talked about it, and I talked about it with my the leader, the in-staff person in Minnesota, saying that there is a possibility for youth to come back as we call them youth leaders and go on the trip and be a new, different role.
All right, we probably have time for just a couple more. The last few whacks of the piñata. I stole that from Mac last week.
You owe me $1 for using
I was
that.
lucky enough to see Mac in action last week, and that's one of the many things I took away. But what are there other probing questions before we check in with Adam about the framing question that he brought to us, and then we're going to have a conversation without Adam's participation. What other probing questions do folks have?
This might be repeated because there's a little bit of lag on my end, but I'll just ask it again if it's a repeat. I apologize. But are there goals for the volunteers? I hear learning of the participants, but is there a intentionality about what the volunteers learn about themselves, or what they publicly learned as a result of being in this process?
There's not, as part of the program, it's not like written into the curriculum, but I did like ask my volunteers, like, it'd be great if you wrote goals too, to model what goal writing is like. And some of them took it seriously, and like one of them actually had like a very personal goal of sharing more of himself because he was a very quiet guy. The other ones were a little bit more kind of going along with it, but didn't necessarily have that. They weren't as intentional about it.
Got it.
Adam, I wonder what opportunities for public or private sort of reflection on goals and progress over the course of the trip the program affords all of its participants.
Each participant gets a journal, and then we write in the journal every night. And the journal has like questions about things like, what did you eat? What was your favorite thing about today? And then it has more deep questions like, what did you learn about yourself today? What was the most challenging part? And then the adults get those too. And then there's a section for writing your goals. And then we do goals check-ins, I think like the third night. And then at the very end we do a goal check-in too. And it's part of the feedback. So it's definitely intentional and part of the curriculum. But it's less intentional with adult volunteers.
Last probing question from anyone? All right. I want to check in with Adam. So the original question you had put out there was, how can I involve adult volunteers for value add to the program without adding additional stress? So I'm wondering, does that still hold true? Are there tweaks? When we say the program, should it be?
Yeah, it could be any program. It could be supports.
Okay. But for the most part, that.
Yeah, I mean, I'm thinking more deeply about the why of involving adult volunteers, but I don't really have a words to put it into that succinctly. So thinking about why should I involve
Maybe
volunteers?
well, maybe we could switch out involve to engage.
Yeah, that's a better way to put it.
Because I guess that would be kind of a more than a one-way street.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, we're gonna move into having a discussion, and we're gonna no offense, we're gonna pretend like you aren't there. So don't feel like you need to respond because we don't want you to. So we're just gonna have a conversation amongst ourselves for a few minutes, maybe 10 minutes, and then we'll just so folks know what's up next. We will then invite you back to the conversation, and based on what our conversation sounded like to you, we'll let you weigh in with what your current thoughts are. Don't feel like you have to, respond to everything point by point. So maybe the highlight reel of where you're at now. So we're gonna have a chat amongst ourselves. So, gentlemen, what do you think? What do you think about what we've heard? And at this point, part of the charge is we're going to try to drill down and define the issue more thoroughly. You're also welcome to lend suggestions in this section.
It seems to me that there's a few things going on. I think an important question to really consider is right off the bat is why are these volunteers here? Are they really there to just support the program, or are they there to take up leadership roles, or is it simply logistical, whatever? And I think that maybe that goes back on Adam and the organization to kind of more clearly define what exactly they're getting, or what exactly they want to get from their volunteers, and then kind of taking that to the next step, right? And then maybe sort of granularly defining the different types of volunteers, right? Maybe there's a logistics support volunteer versus a lead volunteer versus whatever else, and that can also kind of weed out some of the people who are even interested in pursuing the opportunity for volunteering.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think of the phrase stress that from the original request that I put out there, and I sort of see to echo what Michael's talking about. It seems like the reason why there's stress is because there is a lack of clarity of expectation, and so how do you set that up so that people get a clear understanding of what's expected of them and what they're expected to provide? Because I can imagine there's stress on Adam's side when he's like, I would like everyone that's on this trip to be a learning participant, and then when not everybody pulls their weight on it, right? That's an expectation that isn't met. And then that could be an unfair expectation if those volunteers aren't expected to do that. Like they've totally got a different reason there. So I think where Michael's talking about, I think clarifying what is expected of volunteers and what excellence looks like, or at least what we're striving for, would go a long way. I also think it'd be interesting to find out, sort of again, when you think about volunteer management, sort of what do these volunteers want out of this experience, and how clear is it? I think that's I didn't get that sense of clarity, or at least it doesn't seem like Adam's part of that on the early part, or someone in his role is in on the early part. So how do you make sure that's more holistic, as opposed to sort of get these folks that are parachuted in? I don't get a sense that a team building phone call is sufficient in setting that up. So I wonder where are the other ways to start either reading that from the beginning, or at least setting such a strong expectation that people know what they have to sign on for.
Yeah, definitely. That part was really key for me to try to understand as well. Like, what is the communication like internally around the program, and around the goal of having the volunteers come in, the goal of the program in of itself. What do we want the kids to learn, and how are volunteers contributing to that learning, and then where are the volunteers coming from, and the threshold there for sure of stress. Because for sure, I worked with volunteer management and recruitment, and it's one thing to recruit the volunteers and another thing to place them in the classroom with some of the after-school programs that my organization would run. And it's a lot. We do a lot of onboarding with the volunteers. We meet with them, do a lot of conversations on them. The application's a little bit lengthy, and it's meant to be a filtering process, so we can get the right folks in the door. And even when after they meet, the partner that they're going to be working with in the classroom to lead their volunteer opportunity, there's a continuous debrief, check-in, so it's lengthy in the communication. Sometimes it breaks down between the person who recruited the volunteer and the person who's working with the volunteer in the classroom, but having as strong of a link between those two folks for my organization, for the work that I do, has proven to be a successful model.
Yeah, I think something that makes me think of is what is the sort of acceptable level of stress with a volunteer, right? Because you know that there is, without a doubt, whenever you're sort of trying to manage volunteers, that there is some amount of adult management that has to happen. So what is the acceptable amount of stress for a volunteer? And then in order to reach that kind of threshold like Dan spoke to earlier, what are the systems that we can put in place that will allow us to ensure that we're generally not going to cross that threshold of stress, right? And that could be systems like communication systems with volunteers, with group members. It could be training systems. It could be clearly communicating and articulating philosophical beliefs about why kids are in the woods or what volunteers are doing. So I think all of those kind of systems, to me, reduce the level of stress that Adam is really looking at in trying to manage his folks.
I mean, it makes me think back to the intention question from earlier, and it makes me think about why we rarely have volunteers at Eagle Rock. For us, I don't think it's worth the investment. So it makes me wonder. Again, what's the intention? Like, do they in certain programs, do they really need the help, or is it about engaging community, parents, stakeholders? So it makes me wonder. It's back to the threshold question, right? So it's like, why are you doing it, and is it worth it?
Yeah, I think if the answer to that question is it is worth it, then I think maybe a good follow-up question might be, how can we build on relationships that are already existing? And maybe something to consider for Adam would be insourcing the volunteer management instead of outsourcing to whatever the REI system that they use now. But insourcing to where they can attract consistent volunteers over time, so they're maximizing training efforts as a way to continuously build relationships and continuously bring down the amount of stress.
It also
the other thing is, yeah, go ahead.
I'd just throw in like some kind of like asset survey to that process.
Yeah, I was sort of thinking, Dan, you mentioned sort of the intentionality, and you kind of hinted at, like, if it was a president of REI, for example, that might be a really fascinating volunteer because this person's going to champion this work after, right? So if on one level you're bringing on volunteers so they can execute this delivery, that's one thing. But if you're leveraging volunteers who are going to be spokespeople for the urgency of having this type of education and that your organization is going to benefit from that, that can be a really, I think that is, you're cultivating champions out that way. And so I guess what lends to mind is there a way of, like, quote unquote double couponing, as it were. You're not just putting in work, right? You're not just putting in work for these folks to do this 2-day thing, but you're looking at cultivating people who are going to champion this, tell this story. It's funny that you talk about how Eagle Rock doesn't have any volunteers, which is true. Like, I'm sure there's, like, I guess you're right, you know it. But I know I tell the Eagle Rock story to many people because of the visceral experience I had there, right?
Yeah.
So I know you guys cultivate people in that way, so you do invest. But I guess it's being right, or being mindful how you're investing your time, talent, and treasure effectively, so that people can do that. So that's what comes to mind, because I'd like to think it's more than just the weekend, right? Like hopefully it is, or else it is a real stressor. It is a bummer. Like these folks should be giving, or these folks should be telling their network about how great this program is, how great these kids are.
Yeah, and if it's about the process for that person, then it sure is worthwhile. Hence, team service projects, right?
Right. So another really another way to look at it also is that what happens if you reframe the volunteer goal as a learning, as a model for adult learning for students. So you bring the volunteer on as essentially another student, and then you coach them through the process to show students that it doesn't matter, how old you are, but this experience can be powerful, and being outdoors is transformational for anyone, regardless of who they are. And then that way you are kind of changing the nature of the volunteer. Instead of being part of the, could be part of the solution to whatever's happening, you just turn them into essentially another student, and then your management, just that sort of becomes part of your management purview, right?
All right, we're going to, because we're coming up on our time here, I'm going to invite Adam back. Hey, Adam, welcome back.
Hey.
So kind of we're going to give you a few minutes just to share and reflect on what you heard from our conversation. Any new thoughts, epiphanies, cries of outrage? That's another $1, Mac. Anything you're thinking about, or is there a different lens? Where are you at?
Yeah, I think a lot of stuff. So I think with this program, adult volunteers is a major part of why they want to do this program, and I think I personally need to frame and figure out what that means to the program for me, as a staff member. So I probably just need to do some more investigation about what that's supposed to look like, because there might even be examples of, I think it was Mac who said, or maybe I forget who said, the clarifying of what an excellent volunteer looks like, and maybe that's already there, and I just didn't have the way to communicate it to the volunteers yet. So that's something I need to go back and do. But I think, as you were all talking, one of the biggest sources of stress for me is communicating my philosophy of education, my philosophy of discipline, my philosophy of why we're out there, and when I don't have that, when that's the miscommunication, that's the hardest thing to get over, because I can get over. We were talking about levels of stress. I can get over the fact that this person's never been camping, and I can help them be comfortable in the outdoors. I have a harder time having to have a long discussion about why we're even here, and what the purpose of this educational experience is, because that's a bigger discussion that should probably have happened on the front end before we even got out there, and we're trying to figure out why we're there. And I like this idea of labeling volunteers too. Maybe not having it on a sheet of paper or anything, but just mentally categorizing oh, this person could be a champion in their everyday life and talk. I know there are definitely systems for the volunteers to become champions. They do this fundraising thing where you can climb a mountain and raise money for the program and stuff. So there's definitely avenues for that, but understanding on my level of when I'm leading the trip, to understand how I'm going to engage that volunteer in a way. But I'm a little unsure about treating them like a learner. That one was one thing that I definitely see your point, but I don't want the adults' experience to overshadow the youth's experience. I don't want it to become all about them, and having their me catering to them. That goes back to the thing of like me catering to the adults more so than being able to come back to the youth and like support them. Yeah, that was the big stuff that I wrote down.
Awesome.
Cool.
What do you think's next, Adam? What's the next step?
Probably doing some writing or thinking about when I have a next trip about what I want to actually communicate, like being very specific about what I want and like what my role and what their role is going to be before we get out there. Especially if I'm going with the volunteer who's never been there, been outdoors. And then also thinking about the threshold of stress and just being able to like manage my stress and like put labels on it and be like, all right, I'm stressing out because you're just being cranky, or I'm stressing out because you are like disrupting the program, and that's a different kind of stress that I want to deal with. And being able to identify those two different things and know what I should pay attention to and what I should just be like, that person just needs a Snickers bar and they'll be okay.
All right, so in our final 3 minutes, how about just a whip about how this worked for folks, and
I'm moving to a quiet place.
No worries. How was this for folks?
I can speak. I've done consultancy protocols before. I love them. I thought that this one was particularly effective. Adam brought a good question to the table, and I think we kind of hive mind some good strategies for tackling a possible solution. And yeah.
Yeah, I enjoyed it. I think it's interesting. This question is or the answers around this question, even the probing questions around this issue, are very transferable to other types of work. As I mentioned in the front end of the call, I do this kind of work professionally as well, so it's good for me to kind of, we're talking about this physically specific example, but the theory behind it and the bigger picture behind it and the way that we engage with folks who are not staff members who help us and support our work. It's very interesting to kind of have this conversation out loud, but that is the frame, but knowing that it's very related to other areas of work.
I'm just struck how cool it is to have people that are LinkedIn pages or static, titles sometimes on programs, to see them mingle in this virtual space, right?
Yeah.
And to have that, to me, it makes it real, right? And that's the work at PA Alum for me, is making this movement real. And I'm so appreciative for you all to take an hour out of your day to show how powerful it is when like-minded people listen to each other and offer up. And so it inspires me. And one of the things I go is like, what if we had 50 Dans out there facilitating these different circles at the same time? Wouldn't that be neat? There's 5,600 alum and growing. I just think, man, how neat it is to access Dan and access Oscar and Michael and Adam. And I look forward to, I always go, years from now we'll say we were there. 5 years from now, it's going to be huge, right? And we're going to be like, oh, but you weren't on the first calls. It was just Adam talking and all this.
Let's go to the archives.
Right, so when we do a reunion years from now, and there's going to be thousands of people that watch this, but anyway, I just want to extend my appreciation for everyone on the call, especially you, Dan, for bringing this up, and I look forward to the next one. I hope we do it again,
we're doing it again, baby.
We're doing it again. So I don't know, Dan or Adam, you had some parting shots as well.
Yeah, I got something to say. The being able to hear people talk about the issue without my opinion is invaluable. It's so great to hear somebody else's ideas, not colored by my experience, and it's great. Puts a totally new perspective on it.
Yeah, I think I would just echo and say I know that Adam's probably further along having done it that way than us just cracking into solutions, which I think is frequently the mode of operation. So thanks again, and I'm going to reach out to either Michael or Oscar and set up next month. So I'll hit you guys up. I'll hit you guys offline. I appreciate it.
We'll keep the chain going. And we had one viewer during this time. Thank you, one viewer watching. And thanks to the teacher watching it. Catch up with us soon. Look for the invites, but we'll meet again next month. And this is the Ed Reform group hanging out. If you liked it, let us know. Comment, like it, be our friend. Until then. Until then, thanks Dan, thanks Michael, thank you Oscar, and thanks again Adam K for your vulnerability in bringing it. This is Public Allies Alone. Take care, everybody. Bye.